Keeping schools closed can be more than just economic hardship to families. For some families, it's just plain cruel. I'll explain why coming up. Now here's the scoop. The left's been saying it's too early to reopen the schools and that President Trump's push for reopening is irresponsible. Here's what Nancy Pelosi said just a few weeks ago.
So the biggest risk to the spread of the pandemic is opening up the schools in a way that is not safe. So if we're going to defeat this pandemic, we shouldn't be opening up to more arena to spread.
But that was before the COVID-19 relief talks broke down on Capitol Hill, and now they're changing their tune. Here's what Chuck Schumer is saying now.
Opening up the schools safely. If you don't open up the schools, you're going to hurt the economy significantly because lots of people can't go to work.
Now, it's pretty clear what's going on here. The left is using our kids as pawns in a political game. Now that hundreds of billions of dollars in school aid is held up, the left's trying to blame conservatives for denying funds needed for schools to reopen safely, even though they've been insisting for weeks fully reopening isn't possible. They need to stop playing political games and start putting our kids first. Schools aren't just important for restarting our economy by allowing parents to return to work. For many families dealing with disabilities, they're the only thing that makes life even tolerable. It was cruel to close the schools in the first place, and it's heartless to keep them closed now. In 1975, Congress passed the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, that required all school districts to provide free, appropriate public education to all those with disabilities. Last year, there were 7.1 million students aged 3 to 21 receiving special education under IDEA, representing 14% of the entire student population. 86% of these kids, by the way, are members of minority groups. So what's the problem? Disabled kids can just distance learn like everyone else, right? Unfortunately, many can't. That's because the public schools provide many thousands of disabled kids with more than just reading, writing, and math instruction. They also provide occupational and physical therapy, life skills training, behavioral modification, speech and communication therapy, medical care, and more. When the schools closed in March, many of these services stopped, and the kids losing them not only ceased to make progress, they lost skills. In a Fox News Sunday interview several weeks ago, Chris Wallace chastised Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos for saying she might withhold federal funds from schools that refuse to offer in-person classes this fall. Here's the clip.
Under what authority are you and the president going to unilaterally cut off funding, the funding that's been approved from Congress, and most of the money goes to disadvantaged students or students with disabilities? And secondly, isn't cutting off funding exactly the wrong answer?
Wallace's grilling of DeVos was one of the most disingenuous displays I've ever witnessed on cable TV, and you know that's saying a lot. He knows perfectly well that DeVos's intent is not to deny disadvantaged and disabled students education, but exactly the opposite. She's using federal funding as leverage to force school districts that have suspended educational programs for the disabled to resume them. While it's true that Congress appropriates the funding for educational programs, it is the Department of Education that reviews, approves, and administers grants. And the federal law requires that schools provide free, appropriate education to all children with disabilities, not just those whose needs can be met remotely. Public education programs for those with disabilities is about a heck of a lot more than just providing education. They're a critical part of our nation's social safety net. For me, this is very personal. Meet my son, Jonathan.
I'll go for a car ride. Yeah?
No, come here. No, come here.
What's funny?
Jonathan was diagnosed with autism at age 3, a seizure disorder at age 8, and bipolar disorder at age 18. He's one of over 1.1 million students either diagnosed with autism or an emotional disturbance receiving education under IDEA. Now, John can't talk and needs help with even the most basic life functions like eating, dressing, and bathing. And because he doesn't understand the concept of danger and has a history of self-harm and aggression, he requires one-to-one attention every waking hour. Left unattended, he might well run into the street and into the path of an oncoming car, climb to a great height and jump to his death, or even place his hand on a hot stove. But John is also an incredibly affectionate kid, as I'm sure you saw from the clip, and I'm told he's one of his school's favorites because of his sweet demeanor. But that hasn't always been the case. Following my wife's death 3 years ago, John fell into a terrible cycle of violence and aggression. It became so difficult to handle that his school assigned 3 staff members at all times to him for his safety and the safety of others. Even with all that support, there were days John would hit himself or bang his head hundreds or even thousands of times. And I can tell you that he hit really hard. Take a look at what he did to his bedroom door. Things came to a head when John became so aggressive toward me that I required medical treatment. I realized then that even with the help of my 2 other terrific teenage kids, we could no longer handle him alone. But the problem was I couldn't find anyone to hire trained for kids like my son. That's because government programs suck up all the qualified people. And because my state's program for helping families with autistic youth, the Autism Waiver, has an 8 to 9 year waiting list, even to this day, I couldn't even turn to the government for help. After a nearly 1.5 year search, I finally found in-home support that I paid for out of pocket. And the only reason my family managed over those many months is that there was a fully functioning public education system. For 30 hours most weeks, I knew I could count on my son being in a safe environment. This allowed me to cook, work, clean, buy groceries, and even catch up on lost sleep due to my son's irregular sleep patterns. Now, he's now in a great place and has attended school continuously throughout the pandemic. But if John had spent 6 months home 24/7 3 years ago, as many kids like him have this year, we simply wouldn't have been able to do it. Just imagine how hard it is for a single mom with a son as aggressive as mine was, suddenly in March being told she's on her own 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for an indeterminate period of time. Not being able to work is the least of her problems. Her life is one of constant fear and toil without respite. No meals out, no time to socialize with friends, no opportunities to catch a movie, no vacations, and no breaks of any kind. And because she can't afford or can't find in-home support, she has to take her son with her everywhere, even to pick up a few groceries or prescription medications. And because he has trouble transitioning to new, unfamiliar, and loud environments, he's at high risk of having one of his violent outbursts that can be easily misinterpreted and quickly escalate into a matter for law enforcement. That single mom's life is one of near complete isolation. Her only backup, 911. The police and the ambulance needed to take her son safely to an ER. But with the push to defund police departments, will they even come? It isn't as though her troubles weren't difficult enough before the school shut down. Parents of kids with autism have a 1.8 times greater risk of depression and 1.6 times greater risk of anxiety than other parents. Mothers of children with intellectual disabilities and autism have double the risk of death, 40% more likely to die of cancer, as my wife did, 150% more likely to die of cardiovascular disease, and 200% more likely to die of misadventure, such as by an accident, suicide, overdose, or homicide. American Federation of Teachers President Randy Weingarten has pushed back against the Trump administration's pressure to reopen the schools. Here's what she told Bloomberg.
Is the level of evil, frankly, and cruelty here that is at issue in the United States. It's not simply just a matter of incompetence and the failure to follow the science. It's also just cruel.
Weingarten is right that it's the level of evil and cruelty that is at issue here. But it was in closing the schools and denying families with disabilities the resources that make life bearable. That's what was evil and cruel, not restoring these services. You want to provide schools additional resources to promote social distancing, buy PPE, and institute proper hygiene to limit the spread? Fine. You want to continue online classes for students capable of learning remotely, but who fear they won't be safe going back to school? Go ahead. But the schools must reopen to provide children with disabilities with the free, appropriate public education for which they are entitled to under the law. You cannot be for the disadvantaged and the disabled and be for keeping the schools closed. It's just that simple. And that's the scoop. What's your opinion on opening the schools? Let us know by commenting on this video. Want to be among the first to see future editions of ScoopTV? Follow us on YouTube by using the link at the end. And if you'd like to support our work, please consider making a donation online at nationalcenter.org/donate. You can also follow me on both Twitter and Parler at David A. Ridenour. See you next time.